My name is Danica, and today I have my February wrap-up. In February, I stopped being a teacher and I started working for Book Riot. I am a temporary associate editor, at least until July, and I am so excited. I literally get paid to write about books. That is my job. That is the dream. I'm finally a full-time internet book person, which is clearly what I was meant to be. I read 7 books in February, and 4 of them were for All the Books, which is a Book Riot podcast that I co-host. My slot is the first week of the month, so 4 of these were all out March 2nd. This video is sponsored by Rock and Roll Heretic, The Life and Times of Rory Tharp. More on that at the end of the video. So the first book that I read in February was How Do We Relationship Volume 2. This is a manga series. I don't know if I talked about the first volume on this channel before. I am always interested in Yuri manga, but I really want to be reading adult characters, hopefully ones that actually use words like bisexual, lesbian, queer to describe themselves. This series is about 2 women who meet in college, and basically they decide, hey, what are the chances I'm going to run into another out queer woman? Why don't we just date, even though we don't really have anything in common? Let's just see how it goes. And they do, and it's basically about them trying to figure out how to make this relationship work. They're also both working through a lot of self-esteem issues, identity issues, as well as trying to figure out what being in a relationship is really about. I love this series. I love the just frank discussions about relationships. They actually just talk about things instead of trying to assume things. I'm also used to Yuri manga that is very much just like blushing and hand-holding, and this is one of the few that I've read that just has sex scenes and they don't feel like fan service or the male gaze to me. So if you like Yuri manga, I highly recommend this series. Next I read Infinity Sun and Infinity Reaper by Adam Silvera. Infinity Reaper was out March 2nd, so I listened to the audiobook of the first volume and then I read the second volume. This was a really interesting series. I know that a lot of people didn't like this first volume, and I understand why. There are a lot of point of view characters, there's just a ton of vocabulary about the world that just gets thrown at you. So this is basically a superhero world where there are celestials who get their power from the stars, and then there are also people called specters who steal magic by killing magical creatures like phoenixes and using their blood to imbue themselves with power. That is the very simplified version of it because there's a lot going on here. So I understand why people were thrown off by the first book, but I think if you stick with it, it's worth it. The other aspect that can be a little bit difficult is, so again, there's a lot of point of view characters, but this is mainly about the 2 brothers. One of them's called Emil and one of them's Brighton. Emil is like the sweetest person known to man. He is vegan, he's gay, he doesn't like the spotlight, he doesn't really want to be involved in conflict, he doesn't want to fight, very gentle. And then you've got Brighton, who is very power hungry, he always wants the spotlight, he is pretty self-obsessed, and being in his head is kind of difficult because he is not likable. So again, if you hate reading unlikable characters, I can understand why you wouldn't like this. But it is a really interesting world. It is a lot of world building, which is both a strength and a weakness. The second volume has a glossary at the front that helps. It has vocabulary words, it has a little bit about each character, so that can help you. But also, I think at a certain point you gotta just let go. I am so bad with names and vocabulary and that sort of thing that when I am reading a fantasy novel or sci-fi, I just let it wash over me. I know I'm not going to understand. I know I'm going to be lost for a little while. And usually by the halfway mark, I've oriented myself and I've probably missed some things, sure. But I think that's fine. I think people with better memories expect to always understand what's happening and expect to be able to follow along in a very clear way, which in some ways is a weakness because I think there is a lot of value in just letting yourself get submerged in a story and not worrying about if you're picking up on every word that's said. This also has a romance that I think a lot of people would be very into. It's kind of a star-crossed rivals to lovers between Emil and someone on the opposite side of the conflict. His name is Ness. He is wounded and jaded, and Emil is this very optimistic and a little bit naive and, as I said, very kind. So it's a pretty cute dynamic. It also gets complicated in the second second volume, which I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I definitely am going to read the third one. And I think if you're willing to just kind of throw yourself into a speculative story and not feel the need to understand everything right away, I think this is worth it. And then I listened to an audiobook, and I have been having trouble listening to audiobooks. In the olden times, before COVID, I listened to a lot of audiobooks because I would listen to them on the bus on my way to work, especially many years ago when I had a regular routine, which I have again now, but for a few years I didn't really have a routine. And when I stopped having a routine and I stopped having a reliable commute, I stopped listening to audiobooks, and I think it was also because my attention span got so short during COVID. So I was trying to find a way to get back into audiobooks. So I decided to listen to The Hidden Power of Fucking Up by the Try Guys. Because I like the Try Guys, I watched their videos, and I figured this would be basically a way to blend together podcasts, which I listen to a lot, and audiobooks. And I did finish it, and it was fine. It was kind of what I should have expected from the Try Guys audiobook. I enjoyed it as much as I enjoy their videos, which is to say, I like them. I'm not going to listen to it again. I don't really remember a lot about it, but it was fine. I don't know that it did what I intended because it really was just like listening to a podcast. So after I finished it, it wasn't really any easier to start a novel as an audiobook. And then my last three were all for the podcast. The first is What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coster. This was really interesting. It's a literary fiction title, and it basically follows these two families over time, over many decades, but not in chronological order. So it bounces around quite a bit, and it deals a lot with poverty and with race and racism. The blurb of the story is about how this school basically got integrated, that there was a program that bussed in 25% of their students from a poorer area that was mostly black, and there was this huge conflict between the white parents who were in opposition to this and the kids who are trying to go to this new school. And the two families that this is following, there's kids on both sides of this conflict, though the kids don't disagree, but the parents do. And this was really interesting to read. It took some turns I wasn't expecting, and it was interesting to read about this kid in one chapter, and then you start the next chapter and she's an adult who's trying to get pregnant and who is mourning a miscarriage, and it's very interesting to see that character from those two different points in her life back to back. I'm glad I read it. It was a bit of a darker read, and I think right now I am not in the headspace for that as much, but I've been seeing it talked about in a lot of other places, so I think it's getting a lot of buzz right now, which is cool because it is a really well done, thought-provoking story. And then my last two are both bisexual YA books that came out on the same day, which is great because we've reached the point where that's possible. It used to be that I could keep track of and read all of the queer woman books that came out in a year that were mainstream published, and now you've got two bi girl YA books coming out on the same day. So I accidentally read both of these for the same podcast, but I liked them both, so I talked about both of them. The first is I Think I Love You by Oriane December. This is a bisexual rom-com, and it is very much enemies to lovers, so if you like that kind of banter, you'll probably like this. It's also very much a rom-com, which is both the strength and weakness of this book. If you are into that, if you're okay with a little bit of cheesiness, a little bit of miscommunication, that sort of thing, you'll like this. If you are allergic to romance tropes, probably you won't. Basically, this is about Emma, who decides to create the bisexual rom-com movie of her dreams for this film contest. She gets all of her friends to help, except that one of her friends, Sophia, she has just come back from Paris, and she is determined to make something like artsy and cool and does not want to make a cheesy romance. Her parents are divorced, and now she has decided love isn't real, romantic love is terrible, and it ruins everything. So she wants nothing to do with it. Obviously, they end up in a big conflict. The group splits in half. They both make their own movies, but their friends come up with a scheme to try to get the group back together. So what I liked the most about this book was its discussion of bisexuality. Basically, Emma feels like she's nervous to come out to her parents because they are mostly well-meaning, but they've said some questionable things about LGBTQ issues, and she thinks about, is it worth coming out? If I end up with a guy, maybe I shouldn't come out, because if I ended up in a relationship with a man, then it wouldn't matter and I wouldn't need to tell anyone. But she also doesn't really believe that. And she doesn't know how to communicate how bisexuality is a big deal for her, that it's a big part of her identity. I liked that discussion because I think there is often pressure to act like being bi is not a big deal and that you can't claim being queer in the same way, that it should be kind of something that you can brush off. Obviously, this is important for me because I am bi, but I have also created this whole part of my identity around it, and I run the Lesbury, and a lot of my life is about being queer and about queer issues. So I do often get that kind of imposter syndrome of, am I queer enough to be doing this, even though I've been doing it for 10 years? So I liked that discussion. And the last book that I read in February was Follow Your Arrow by Jessica Verdi. This is about Cece, who is an influencer. She has almost 1 million followers, and her girlfriend are kind of this relationship goals couple, except that offline they have been arguing a lot and eventually they break up. And Cece is trying to figure out who she is, what her brand is outside of this relationship. And then when she ends up falling for this guy who is very offline, she doesn't know how her fans will react to it, and she doesn't know how he will react to her online life. I liked this one a lot. I thought it was, again, a really interesting discussion of bisexuality, biphobia, bi-erasure. You can listen to the podcast for my full thoughts about this, but basically I can relate to Cece, and it has that idea of, am I queer enough? Can I really claim that if I'm just bi, especially if I am with a guy? It looks at cancel culture and being an online person and both the pros and cons of that. It's not really black and white with it. I think it has a more nuanced take. There's also this subplot about how Cece used to be a lot more political. Her whole wall is covered in protest signs from rallies that she attended, but then she got in these screaming arguments with her conservative father, and eventually he left, and she felt like she needed to tamp that down, and now her whole online persona is very inoffensive. So I liked her trying to come to grips with her identity and about the things that are important to her. And I also liked that it validated the boundaries that she set with her dad. It wasn't just that you need to have a relationship with him just because he's your father. It really confirmed that sometimes the best thing you can do is not have a relationship with those people, if that's just going to be something negative in your life and if that's someone who doesn't actually accept you as you are. So 2 YA books that really look at bi identity. If that's something that interests you, and if you're watching this channel, there's a good chance that it is, I would recommend them. Especially this one. I liked this one a lot. And those were all the books that I read in February. Thank you to Rock and Roll Heretic for sponsoring this video. I will include links in the description for you to pre-order this, and here's the description. It's the late 1970s. An ex-Pentecostal black female electric guitarist, Rory Tharpe, navigates the cutthroat world of corporate rock, dive bars, dusk to dawn recording sessions, and shady contracts as she travels the nation in a dilapidated tour bus with her bickering, boozing, all-male band. Much imitated and little credited, Rory is in a late career tailspin when she goes on tour with international superstar Jude Justice, a white woman blues rock singer who has built a turbulent mega-platinum career out of stealing from black musicians. Broke and frustrated by the racism, sexism, and ageism of the Rock Boys Club, Rory warily joins forces with Jude. She then takes a detour through the painful past she shares with childhood nemesis Divinity Mason Mulvaney, a maverick pastor at the helm of the megachurch enterprise Revivals Inc. In homage to pioneering guitarist Rosetta Tharpe, Rock and Roll Heretic is a bracing look at the power politics, heartbreak, and hypocrisy confronting a queer black woman visionary at the intersection of music and commerce, faith and heresy, in a segregated music industry that eats its black artists. Some praise for Rock and Roll Heretic. If you love fearless, bold, unapologetic, strong leads, then Rock and Roll Heretic is for you. Paying homage to the great trailblazer Sister Rosetta Tharpe, this book is filled with twists and turns that will leave you rethinking rock music as you knew it. This is a masterpiece that will challenge history and entertain readers for years. And that's from Melina Moy, electric guitarist, international recording artist, and co-founder of the Drive Hope Foundation. So again, if you want to pre-order Rock and Roll Heretic, check out the links in the description. Let me know in the comments what you read in February, or if you have a wrap-up video, feel free to link in the comments and I'll definitely check it out. And until next time, happy reading!